It's time for another episode of Gospel Preaching Live, brought to you by the Kearney Church of Christ, which meets at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri. Make plans to come out and visit the brethren, who look forward to seeing you. And now the host of Gospel Preaching Live, Richard Dodson.
Welcome to Gospel Preaching Live. My name is Richard Dodson, and I work as a minister at the Kearney Church of Christ. Kearney Church of Christ is located in Kearney, Missouri, and we would certainly welcome anyone to visit with us. You can always reach out to us by going to our website at www.kearneychurch.com, and we would be more than happy to hear from you. If you have any questions about the show today, if you are watching on Facebook and YouTube, you can leave your comment in the comment section. Or if you would like, you can call me at 816-686-9517. That's 816-686-9517. You can, and I'm in the Central Time Zone. Also, you can email me at gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. That's gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. Maybe you have a additional comment about the lesson. Maybe you got some criticism, a question, or maybe you got an idea for a sermon. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want to bring up to me, I'd love to hear from you. And help me by, if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, by sharing this. And if you're watching it on one of the podcasts, or I'm sorry, not watching it, but listening on one of the podcasts, then, spread this message around if you agree with it after examining what I say, and help us to spread God's word. Okay, this evening we're going to address a topic that's back in the news. I'm probably, I'd have to say, I'm as an evangelist, I think I've been a little lax in addressing this topic. I started 2 years ago, and the topic is gambling. I started 2 years ago, and I addressed it pretty hard then, back when Missouri started having riverboat gambling. But, as with everything, people get used to having something around and you don't address it as much. I mean, I'd make comments like in Bible class and things of that nature, but to address it into a lesson, no, I probably should have been waging this war a little harder. So I do apologize for that. But we're going to try to remedy that this evening. And the reason being is because sports gambling is getting to be pretty big in this country. And the very reason it came to mind is because it's getting ready, or it's taking form in Kansas, where you can gamble on sports games online now. In fact, the governor of Kansas, she was the first one to lay a bet down on a game this weekend. So that's big news, and that's kind of depressing. It's very depressing, because now people can just gamble right off their phones, locally. And there are advertisements that go along with it. All these little gaming apps that they have are offering an incentives to try to get people to gamble. And what I'm really hoping is that Christians will not get caught up in it, but they have. I had the same hope years ago when gambling became legal in Missouri, but and I brought that up at the time. I was fearful that Christians would get caught up in it, but they have. And so that's something that needs to be addressed, because it is something that is not going to help the Christian get to heaven. And that's what we need to be doing. Now, like I said, sports betting, if you read this, sports betting is legal in Kansas as of July 1st, 2022. And it's not legal yet in Missouri. It's restricted to offshore accounts, but needless to say, it's getting big. And if it hasn't been passed where you are, it probably will soon be, or at least it's being talked about And that's a sad thing. But because like we see with the church at Corinth, the things that happen around our society have a way to make its way. It makes its way into the church, and because we live in the world, and so we cannot be worldly. We have to be spiritual, but we also, we can't be ignorant of the things around us, like Sodom and Gomorrah, and how that might have had an effect on Lot and his family. And so we understand then that evil in society can come into the church, as it did in Corinth, and Paul rebuked them for that. So hopefully, as we look at this lesson, we will consider gambling. If you haven't thought about sports gambling or other forms of gambling in and of itself, you'll think twice about it, because it's not a good thing. And I don't believe it's something, I know it's not something that God's pleased with. He's not wanting to see Christians wasting away the blessings that he gives them on such a thing as this. This is just a map, and I'll blow it up for you just to illustrate. And this is for those who are watching on Facebook and YouTube. But if you can see the states in red, you'll notice that these states is where the sports betting is legal now. And of course, where it's shaded pink, it's coming. It's just not operational. So this is just nearly everywhere. There's very few states in white, as you can tell, and that's sad. That's sad because of what it takes place when gambling takes place, what it does to a society, and we think that it's helping us. We think that we're better for it, but we're not. And all I can say is, there's a reason why sports gambling and other forms of gambling were illegal for years and years. There's a reason for that. And gambling has a tendency to always show its ugly face until it wreaks havoc. And then when everybody gets smart, they get rid of it again, and it'll come back eventually again. And people see it as a way to make money. And it makes certain people money, but it doesn't make everybody money. And it takes money out of a given location, a community, and that's not a good thing. So anyway, in 1984, and this is my history with it because I'm 59 years old. Before 1984, I really didn't see any gambling anywhere. The gambling that I knew of was like underground gambling. Now you could go to Vegas to gamble, and Reno. I think you could go there to gamble. Those were some places that people knew that they could go gamble. But around here, this was home, and so we didn't think much of that. And when I'm talking about home, now Smithville is just reason I even bring up Kansas. Smithville's where I live is 15 miles away from the Kansas line. You cross the Missouri River and you're in Kansas. So what happens in Kansas, what happens in Missouri, it affects our community and the church where I'm at in Kearney. It affects it. So that's why it's on my mind, and it's something I wanted to address. But being that I'm 59 years old, I can think back to when gambling was not in our community. And I can tell you that you can blame gambling if you want to. And but before gambling showed its ugly face, it seemed like, families, their money went farther. They may not make as much money as we make today, but when you count inflation, it just seemed like their money went farther. And there wasn't as much corruption as we see today. The numbers on murder and things like that, they've gone way up. And then, of course, a lot of that can be blamed on many things, but I think gambling plays a role in that. But in 1984, that's when Missouri first came up with the lottery. My wife actually fought against that. She actually tried to keep that from taking place. But the lottery, they sold the lottery because they said it was going to make a lot of money for the schools. Well, why couldn't if the schools needed that money? They could have just taxed the citizens, but instead they came up with creating a lure for its citizens to covet, and that's why people play the lottery anyways, because they're coveting the prize money. People wouldn't play it if there wasn't a prize. If it was just a play to play, they wouldn't pay money to do that. So the hope is that they have is to get rich. So they have a desire for that money. In 92, riverboat casinos were passed, and that was an interesting little deal. I had some experience with that. There was a town here in Parkville that I think they went through 3 elections before they finally got the vote where they wanted it, where riverboat casinos would be allowed. And the funny thing was, I don't know if they ever did get the votes, because when everything was all said and done, the people looked up the voter log and found that there was a lot of dead people who had voted. And so I was building houses back then, and I remember going through town, and they were offering me free lunches if I would vote for the riverboat casinos. And of course, I was only in town because I was building a house over there. So, but it was interesting. It was an interesting experience to see how hard that they were pushing. And of course, there was politicians that got into trouble for that. They come to find out later there was corruption involved. And then, of course, in 2016, fantasy sports was legalized. So again, that's my history of watching gambling as it takes place. And when we think about gambling, there's a lot of people like to think, oh, the farmer gambles. How can you be against, playing the stock market's a gamble? Farming's gambling. How can you be against gambling? Well, a lot of people just look at the definition that like Merriam-Webster has, and it's a very narrow definition. It's just the practice or activity of betting, the practice of risking money or other stakes in a game or bet. But really, the definition we're looking for is attempting to get something for nothing without rendering service or exchange of goods. That's exactly what we're looking for. Uh, you're attempting to get something without working for it, without doing anything for it. So that's the definition we're going to look at. Now, one of the verses I want us to consider is in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 15 through 16. Notice what Jesus said: beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. And are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? I've always tell the brethren at Kearney the same thing. False teachers are not going to come to church wearing a white shirt with big black letters that says grievous wolf. They're not going to do that, or ravenous wolf, or false teacher. They're not coming in like that. And so you're going to have to be, they're going to look like me or you. And so you're going to have to learn to recognize them. And Jesus said you can do that by the fruit that they bear. Now, of course, we're at this point in this passage, we're thinking about an individual, a false prophet, but that would also apply to any type of activity that one may be engaged in. And so I want us to honestly consider the fruits of gambling. And then after looking at these fruits, I want you to ask yourself how gambling can possibly help anyone go to heaven. But let's consider some of the fruits of gambling. Addiction. They were talking about this thing that's getting ready to take place in Kansas, where sports gaming, you can do on the app on your phone and locally. And they interviewed a man who was an addicted gambler. And, he was very fearful of it. I mean, you could tell he was a reformed gambler. And he feared gambling because he knows firsthand what it can do. And he said, boy, my biggest fear is that it's going to be too easy. Now, that was a man who knows exactly what it's like to be addicted to something that's harmful. and it caused a great deal of harm to him. And gambling is something of that nature. Gambling can be very addictive, and that's been proven. People can see that. And I always like the casinos and the gambling places. They always offered counseling to those who are fearing that they might be addicted. I, that's always just been so funny to think that they're the ones that's offering the counseling, but that's a fruit of gambling. There's no doubt about it. Now, somebody might say, well, if you're somebody that's getting addicted to it, you shouldn't do it. Well, how do you know until you've done it? It's like alcohol. The alcoholic will tell you that his biggest regret is the first drink. And so again, you don't know if you're addicted to something until you've done it. And that's a fruit of gambling. And of course, something else that brings about poverty. I've seen firsthand how people have gambled away their living money because they just feel like they're so close to winning, and they'll bet their rent money, they'll bet their house payment money, their food money, and pretty soon they're in poverty, and that's a shame. And sometimes when that happens, people turn to crime, and that makes sense, doesn't it? If you're addicted, you're going to want to you got to have money so you can gamble, and so you're going to try to go about getting it any way you can. You're like the drug addict, and if you're in poverty and you're trying to keep your family from falling in poverty, you're tempted to fall into crime. And so that's something else that is a fruit of gambling. How many marriages have been broken because of gambling? A great deal. A good article for someone to read is a quarterback. He was a quarterback when I was a young man for Ohio State, had all the potential in the world. But look him up online and read his story. His name was Art Schlichter. Art Schlichter, Ohio State. He's got a Wikipedia page, and you can read how gambling has just destroyed his life, how it destroyed any hope of a relationship. It's a bad thing, and that's what gambling does. Gambling brings about many broken marriages. It may not bring every marriage to its knees, but it brings many more than would have brought. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then of course covetousness. People don't gamble for free. They got the hope of making money. That's the whole reason they gamble, is they want to make that money. And so again, those are the fruits of gambling. And when you consider its fruits, as Jesus said, what do you come up with? If you consider the fruits of gambling, then you got to think that this can't be a good thing. But yet there are those who call good evil and evil good. And so, that's something that we have to consider. In Matthew chapter 25 and verses 14 through 30, we find the parable of the talents. And that's where Jesus compared the kingdom of heaven into a man who put 3 servants in charge of some of his possessions, his money. One was given 5 talents, one was given 2 talents, one was given 1 talent. And the man who was given 5 talents, he made 5 more. The man who was given 2, he made 2 more. But the one who made 1, who was given 1, he buried his in the sand. And because he wasn't a good steward, he was kicked out, basically banished to hell. Which is meaning the whole point of this is that if we're not good stewards with the Lord's blessings, then we're going to be held accountable, and we can lose our souls for this. And so that's the whole purpose of the parable of the talents. We need to be good stewards over his blessings. Now, money, the things that the Lord gives us, that is something that's a blessing. And it belongs to Jesus for Christians. We understand that everything we have belongs to Jesus. In Ephesians 4 and verse 28, Paul said, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. All right, so that's part of our, purpose of working is to be able to give to him that needeth. Well, what about the money we're gambling away? How we could use that money and give it to someone who's in need. But again, there's no authority for gambling that I can see. But giving, I mean, that just takes money away that we could give. Now, remember, we're a steward of the Lord's things, and in gambling, you're just throwing that money away. I mean, there's a reason why Vegas is one of the fastest growing cities. And it's built on gambling, and that's money that people go and give them basically in hopes of hitting it rich, and the odds are so slim. So you're basically just giving the Lord's money away, and money that the Lord's given you to fulfill this purpose, to give to someone who is in need. Now, another reason why the Lord gives you money to watch over is He wants you to use that money to provide for your family. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, "If any provide not for his own, especially of those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." So providing for your family is something that you need to be using the blessings of God to do. The Lord expects you to be able to do that. Now remember, as I've already pointed out, and I think everyone knows, there are those who spend so much time in gambling that they take money that's going to go to their family and they gamble it away. That's not a good thing. But this is something we need to be using the Lord's blessings on, is providing for our family. And something else is, the work of the church. The work of the church it doesn't just happen. We all have to do our part, and part of that is funding the preaching. In 1 Corinthians 16:1 and 2, we see the command that Paul gave the church in Corinth, as well as to the churches of Galatia, that there was to be a collection for this that takes place on the first day. They were supposed to lay up aside, as you've been prospered. But what if you're taking that which you've been prospered and you're giving it away in gambling? That will take money away from the Lord's work, and that can cost someone their soul. What if that money could be used to fund one more preacher, one more radio spot, one more pamphlet? That could go to someone who needs to hear the gospel. But yet you're just tossing the money away instead of doing something with it that the Lord would have considered a very good investment. And again, that's not that hurts the church, and that hurts the Lord's cause. And so we shouldn't be thinking of ourselves as a good steward if we're taking the Lord's blessings and we're gambling them. Something else I want you to consider. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, as we read this verse, see where gambling falls in. He says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, what is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think on these things." Where does gambling fit in on this? Because I'm asking the question, how gambling promotes godliness. Where does it fall in? Because I'm not seeing it anywhere. I don't see how it does, especially if you're going to the casinos. And what do you see in a casino? Well, there's a lot of covetousness taking place. There has always been crime and corruption involved. There's usually alcohol that's being consumed. And in Vegas, it's my understanding there's prostitution. They got those showgirls walking around in immodest apparel. I mean, I don't see how any of that comes into play in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Now, that may be the extreme position. Somebody may say, well, what if I'm just using my phone to gamble? Well, again, where does that come into play? How is that just? How is it pure? I mean, all these things. Where does gambling promote godliness? And I am not sure that it does. In Titus chapter 2 and verse 7 and 8, Titus was told by Paul to show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching, show integrity, dignity, sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. Well, if you beat somebody in a bet, uh, I bet I bet he's not going to be speaking too well of you. But we need to be a model of good works. That's where our focus needs to be. And gambling doesn't fall into that. Again, it does not promote godliness. Something else to consider is, who are you fellowshipping when you gamble? In 1 Timothy 5 and verse 22, Paul told Timothy, do not be hasty in laying on of hands. And then he said this, nor take part in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. Let's say you're playing poker and you beat this poor man out of his money, and that's the money he was going to use to provide for his family. So that's a sin. You know that's a sin, but you're the one that took it. You're taking part in his sin. You put temptation in front of him, and now you got his money that his family needs. Now, see, that's the sort of thing that takes place when you're gambling. You are fellowshipping, you're fellowshipping sin. You're taking part in the sins of others, and that's not something we should be doing. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, be not deceived, evil communications corrupt good manners. When you are fellowshipping people who are of this sort, who like to gamble, then you're going to be corrupted. And that's just not me saying that. That's the Lord saying it. You will be corrupted. You're not going to just be able to take part in this and not be innocent. It doesn't happen. Well, those are some points I wanted to leave you with about sports gambling and other forms. I don't have a verse that says thou shalt not gamble. There's no such thing. But again, when you consider everything that the Bible teaches and you look at what gambling is, you have to come away from that shaking your head thinking, boy, I don't see it. I don't see what Christianity has anything to do with gambling. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 9 and 11, Timothy is told, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and into a snare, to many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains. But as for you, O man of God, flee these things. Pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, and gentleness. Well, again, those are the things we're supposed to be pursuing. Where does gambling come into play? Because the first part of that talks about those who want to be rich. That's exactly who plays the lottery. People who want to be rich. And they'll buy lottery tickets all the time. They just keep buying them and losing, buying and losing. But they keep buying. And again, if there wasn't that hope of them hitting the big time, hitting it rich, they wouldn't be buying. So they want to be rich. I mean, that's their desire. They could take that lottery money and give it to the church and think of, man, what if it just saved one person? But they don't do that. They want to be rich. And a lot of times we get addicted to those lottery tickets like we get addicted to anything else. Brethren, 1 Thessalonians 5:22 says, abstain from every form of evil. And I hope after tonight's lesson, you'll look at this and say, yes, gambling is a form of evil, and you'll stay away from it. You know what? If you're ever in the Kearney, Missouri area, would you come and meet me? I would love to see you. So would the brethren at the Kearney Church of Christ. We meet at 406 North Clark every Sunday morning for 9:30 for Bible study, 10:30 for worship. And you can get directions by going to kearneychurch.com. If you like this lesson, you want to hear more like this, you can tune in to KPGZ 102.7 FM. That's our hometown radio station in Kearney, Missouri, and you can hear a lesson from God's Word. And if you are outside of Kearney and you still want to listen, you can stream it on your mobile device. They do provide that. This lesson and others like it, you can also pick up on Spotify or various other platforms. If you have a platform that you use to listen to this podcast and you are not able to find me, send me an email and I'll help you find it. And don't forget Berean Spirits. That's an internet show I take part in with a couple other preachers. we get together every Thursday at 10 a.m. and we have a Bible study, and we try to study as the Bereans in Acts 17. You can go to carneychurch.com if you want to participate and press on the Berean Spirits or the Facebook or YouTube app. You'll be able to make comments in the comment section, and we include those on the show. But we try to include our listeners in the Bible study. But that airs every Thursday at 10 a.m. And we keep past episodes up there. And it's podcast as well. So you can hear, if you don't get to hear it live, you can hear past episodes. All right, that's all I have for you this evening. Lord willing, I'll come to you again this Thursday not this Thursday, that's today. Sunday at 6 p.m. Until then, remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice in it and be glad.
This has been Gospel Preaching Live. Join us each week as truth is taught, faith is examined, and beliefs are challenged. Be sure and hit the like button so you can be notified of future episodes. And to watch past episodes, go to our website, carneychurch.com. This has been a work of the Kearney Church of Christ.